Welcome back to part 2 of the agriculture notes. So we're going to start with soil conservation this time. And you should have your document that you downloaded from Canvas. And in that document, you'll see the links to the videos. And you should just write all your notes on that document. All right, and again, you can pause the video. You can listen to parts of it again if you need to. And just take your time going through it. And so one of really a non-renewable resource, one of the most important is soil, except people don't think of it as a non-renewable resource. Now you know how long it takes to make soil, about 100 years. It could be up to 500 years depending on the biome, just for a centimeter of soil. But we just take it for granted. So soil conservation has to be very important in agriculture. So one method to protect the soil, to conserve it, is contour plowing. So you can see in this picture, it's a little hard to see that this is a hilly area. If they were to plow just straight lines over a hill, some of those lines would head straight downhill. So water would, when it rains, would have a path to follow straight down the hill, and it would go really fast. Well, the faster water moves, the more soil it can carry with it. So straight lines down a hill are going to increase erosion. But in the way they've done this, there's never a straight line down a hill. So the water can never pick up speed and it can't carry the soil away quite so quickly. Another method that's used is mixing up the crops. So in one row, this is called strip cropping, you alternate rows. One would be a row crop, like corn, for instance, that's always planted in rows. And the crop next to it would be something that completely covers the soil, like oats. So in this picture, the lighter color, that's oats. The color next to it, darker color, that's corn. So you alternate it. And let's say the wind picks up some soil in the row crop, because if you've ever seen corn, there's a lot of soil that's left bare with the corn crop. But the wind will pick up the soil there, but it'll blow it into the row next to it, which is a cover crop. That'll catch the soil before it gets blown away, and the soil will fall down into that row. So the soil might get blown a little bit, but not very far. This we don't see in the United States very often. This is terracing. And we have lots and lots of land in the United States. So we just don't farm in really steep areas. But you do see this in countries where they've got a lot of people and not that much land. They have to make use of all their space, even the hilly areas. And why are hilly areas not good for growing crops? Because of soil erosion. So how do you reduce the soil erosion? You terrace, and this is very expensive. So because we have plenty of land, we don't do this. So the water starts running downhill, but it will run from one terrace and it'll fall down to the next terrace, and it's got a flat platform there. So it will slow down. And when it slows down, it doesn't carry as much soil away. And then the water will spill over one terrace to the next one. And again, the water slows down. So this can prevent soil erosion, but again, very expensive to build all these terraces. Conservation tillage. The idea here is you never plow the ground so there's nothing left in it. You don't want bare soil. So you leave the previous crop in the ground, and what's going to happen? It's going to biodegrade and become fertilizer. So it's kind of a double bonus. You don't leave bare soil, because bare soil, the wind can pick it up and blow it away. And also the fertilizer. So natural fertilizers from the plants decomposing. Another huge problem is overgrazing animals. This was one of the tragedy of the commons. The original tragedy of the commons essay was about overgrazing. So you can see in this picture the harm that can happen. You've left bare soil, the animals are trampling it, so wind can pick it up, water can pick it up, and you don't have the plants holding the soil in place. So, and an added problem with grasses is most of their nutrients are stored in the blades, not in the roots of the plant. So overgrazing causes numerous problems. It lowers the productivity of the range. So a lot of the plants are going to die. They've lost most of their nutrients. They can't grow enough, so they die. And that's from the animals grazing them right to the ground, and that's where their nutrients are stored. It lowers the biodiversity of the range because a lot of the plants can't survive the animals eating it right to the ground. They can't survive the trampling by these big animals. So a lot of the plants will die out. It also increases erosion, and you can imagine that from this picture, that both wind and water is going to blow that soil away or wash it away. And it increases desertification. So I mentioned that once before. That's when an area goes from, maybe it was an arid area, it's fairly dry, but there's still plants, to a desert where there's very few plants growing. And we think about 38% of the land worldwide is in danger of this because of climate change. It's getting hotter, it's getting drier. And then also you add animals to that, and an area that used to support grasses can't do that anymore. It's no longer grassland, it's become a desert. And then invasive species can have a space to grow now. If all the native grasses were filling up this area, there wouldn't be space for those invasive species. Now, fertilizer is another big change that's happened with our new way of doing agriculture. So generally, limiting factors are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. There's other nutrients that plants need, but these are the major nutrients. And that's what you find in fertilizer. They have a lot of those three, plus they can have some other smaller nutrients in them. And you can see that in the label here. There's two different kinds of fertilizer. There's something called inorganic fertilizer. It's made synthetically, so it can be mined out of the ground, or the nitrogen is pulled out of the air. And the use of inorganic fertilizer, or sometimes it's called chemical fertilizers, it's increased 9 times since 1950. And all those nutrients cause a lot of water pollution, which we will talk about later. Then there's organic fertilizer. And organic fertilizers come from plants or animals. And it's animal manure. So that's one possibility. So it is the dung, the poop, and the urine from livestock. And the other thing it can be is compost. So that's decomposed plant material. And it's decomposed by bacteria or fungus or other microorganisms. And it's got all those nutrients that plants need. Now, here's what happens when we put too much fertilizer. And it doesn't matter if it's organic fertilizer or inorganic fertilizer. Either one, it's natural or chemical, it doesn't matter, it can lead to the same problem, eutrophication of waterways. And along with it, fish kills, which is what's in this picture. So there's a whole process that happens. Too much fertilizer, or this can also be organic waste, like animal waste. So it could be from a feedlot, a pig farm, it could be from horses. All that organic material from their waste products can wash into a waterway, like what you see in this picture, or it could be fertilizer that washes into a waterway. And it's got all those nutrients that plants need to grow, right? That's why we apply fertilizer or organic fertilizer, which is animal waste, or can be. So those fertilizers make plants grow. Well, algae is a type of plant, so algae grows. And then the algae dies and they sink. All that dead algae sinks to the bottom of the waterway where it gets decomposed by aerobic bacteria. So aerobic means uses oxygen. And what happens? Those bacteria use up the oxygen in the water. And that's what leads to the fish dying. It's a hypoxic zone. Hypo meaning little oxygen. And it's all because of that fertilizer caused the algae to bloom, which then died, sunk to the bottom, and the bacteria decomposed it. And we have hypoxic zones all around the world. They are Gulf of Mexico is a famous one. It's a huge hypoxic zone from the Mississippi River flowing into the Gulf of Mexico with all the fertilizer from farms in 2/3 of the United States. But that's not the only one. There's more hypoxic zones around the world than there ever have been. And actually, a study came out a couple years ago that the ocean has less oxygen in it than it ever has. Two reasons. All of these hypoxic zones from agriculture and also warming water. And we'll learn in the next unit, warm water doesn't hold as many gases as cold water does. So between the water's warming and all this fertilizer, we've got less oxygen in the oceans than ever. So how can we reduce the amount of fertilizer? Because fertilizer is a huge problem. One way is rotating the crops. So one year you plant a type of plant that's going to use a lot of nutrients. So for example, corn, tobacco, cotton is another one. And then the next year you plant legumes like beans or peas or lentils, because legumes have these little nodules on their roots. That is actually a mutualistic relationship between a bacteria and the plant. So those nodules that you see in the picture are bacteria growing in these pockets, and the bacteria are nitrogen fixing bacteria. So they will take nitrogen gas out of the air and get that started through the nitrogen cycle that you learned about earlier. So if you rotate these nitrogen fixing plants, then it's actually bacteria that fix the nitrogen, but you will end up with much better soil in the long run. So crop rotation, and different plants need different nutrients. And if you constantly plant the same plant over and over, the soil is going to become depleted. Another idea to make agriculture more sustainable is a polyculture. Poly means many. So culturing many. And you can see in this picture, what are they growing? They're growing many different types of plants. So you grow many and you're mimicking biodiversity and natural ecosystems. So one of many advantages, well, you don't deplete the soil as much because each plant uses a different ratio of nutrients out of the soil. If there's a pest that attacks one type of plant, it's probably not going to attack the other types of plants. So lots and lots of benefits to polycultures. Energy. We use a huge amount of energy in our current methods of agriculture. Actually, about 15% of the total energy use in the US goes to growing food. And that is 50 times more than in the 1950s because we use more machines, more fertilizer, we transport our food further. So energy use has increased hugely. And then all of the greenhouse gas emissions that are connected to the energy use. And now we have something called the gene revolution. The first gene revolution has been happening since humans first started raising plants and animals, just artificial selection. So every season, the farmers pick the plants that produce the most seeds, and that's what they use to grow the next season's crops. Or the livestock that produce the most eggs, the biggest offspring, and that's what they breed together. That's the first gene revolution. It's natural selection, but we call it artificial because it's people doing it, not nature. So from artificial selection, here's an example. Wild cabbage has been bred into all these different vegetables, and all of them very healthy, by the way. So broccoli, kohlrabi, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, believe it or not, they all have the same ancestor. But now we have the second gene revolution. This is genetic engineering. So we don't go through the slow process of artificial selection. Instead, we can take DNA from one organism and put it into a different organism to give it whatever the desired trait is. This would never happen in nature. The first gene revolution with artificial selection, that doesn't introduce foreign DNA. It's just accentuating certain traits that humans want. The second gene revolution is a different story. We're taking DNA from one organism and putting it into another organism. So two crops grown very commonly in the United States that are almost all genetically modified is corn and soy. If you buy it organically, organic corn or organic soy, it has not, it can't be a genetically modified organism with DNA from a different organism put into it. So let me tell you a little bit about these corn. It's been genetically modified to produce a protein by a bacteria, soil bacteria. And that protein kills the larva of the European corn borer. And you can see the corn borer in the left-hand picture. When the corn borer attacks a plant, so that the adult lays its egg and the larva tunnels through the corn stem, it makes the corn fall over, like you can see in the right-hand picture. And that's never going to be able to produce corn because the part that's fallen over is going to dry out before it ever gets a chance to pollinate and produce corn. So this is a big problem. So they took the gene for a protein. Remember, genes make proteins, and they put it into corn. So now the corn makes this protein that kills the corn borer. It sounds like a great idea, right? Because now the farmers don't need to spray pesticides to kill the insect. Instead, the corn will make its own pesticide, a natural protein. Well, I thought it was a good idea until I heard that 90% of babies born in this country have this protein in them. And it's from the mother eating corn, sometimes not even eating corn. Corn is in all sorts of things. So you don't realize you're eating corn and this protein that's in the corn, you're eating, a cereal, or it can be a filler product. It's even in like aspirin. It's cornstarch. So people are getting all of this protein and it kills the European corn borer. What does it do to people? We don't really know. Another genetically modified organism is actually a number of organisms is resistant to glyphosate. So glyphosate is the chemical in Roundup. And they have developed, Monsanto is the company, has developed seeds where it's got a gene, so Roundup doesn't kill it, or glyphosate doesn't kill it. So you can spray Roundup on your crops. It won't kill your corn or your soy, but it will kill all the other weeds. So it sounds like a good idea, except glyphosate is, the World Health Organization has named it a probable carcinogen. California has also named it a probable carcinogen. Carcinogen means it causes cancer. So Roundup is sprayed in huge amounts around the world where they use these genetically modified seeds. So we're being exposed to a large amount of this chemical. And I want you to realize what a problem glyphosate can be. So I'd like you to watch this video. And this is a Goldman Prize winner from Argentina, from South America in 2012. So the link is in your document with your notes. So controlling pests is a big problem, especially with our monocultures. Acres and acres of one type of crop, an insect population can get out of control. So a pest is any species that interferes with what humans are trying to do, whether it's they're eating the food that we want to eat, they're invading our home, our gardens, destroying building materials, spreading disease, invading ecosystems. We call it a pest. And pesticides are chemicals that kill or control populations that we don't want around. So there's insecticides, there's herbicides. So insecticides kill insects, herbicides kill plants, herbs. Fungicides kill fungi. Rodenticides kill rodents. And there's this first generation of pesticides. They were the first ones used, actually in the 1600s. That was the first pesticide ever used. They would soak tobacco leaves in water, and then they would spray the water on their plants. And the nicotine sulfate that's in the tobacco leaves would kill insects. Keep that in mind if you smoke or vape, that the chemicals in tobacco will kill insects. So what is it doing to you? Not a good idea. Second generation pesticides, they are produced in laboratories. They were first used in the 1940s. One example is DDT. And ever since the Green Revolution started in the 1950s, our pesticide use has increased 50 times. Some of the chemicals, we know what they do, and some of them we don't know what they do. And another concern is mixing chemicals together. Maybe one by itself isn't so bad, but when it's with another chemical or another group of chemicals, it can be really bad for the environment or for human health. So there is always some pesticide residue, so the chemicals that are still on the food. And I'll show you in class how to look up foods that have the most pesticide, produce with the most pesticides on them. There's what's called the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. So I'll tell you about those in class. But another problem is a lot of pesticides are persistent, meaning they last for a long time in the environment. And those are the ones that can bioaccumulate. So they're just in small numbers in aquatic plants. And then the small aquatic animals, the zooplankton that eat those small phytoplankton, aquatic plants, because they're eating a few plants every day, they get more in them. And then the small fish that eat all the zooplankton, it's a little bit higher in them, and on up the food chain. So I'd like you to watch this video, and the link is in your notes, and take notes about bioaccumulation. Another issue with pesticides is they gradually become less effective. The typical pesticide will last for about 10 years. And after 10 years, insects have evolved a resistance to them. So what's counterintuitive here is our crop losses from insects have increased over time. We're using more pesticides than ever, more insecticides, and yet we're losing more crops than ever because we grow with a monoculture. So we've got to use the pesticides because we use a monoculture, and yet our losses are greater. So if you switch to a polyculture, then yes, you might lose one crop, but other crops will be fine. So one alternative to chemical pesticides is natural predators. So here's a wasp, for example, that lays its eggs on the tobacco hornworm caterpillar. You can see the eggs on the caterpillar, and then the larvae feed on the caterpillar, and eventually the adult wasps will emerge. I tell you, every horror film, if you ever want to make a new horror film or write a book, just go look in the insect world. Every scary thing you could ever imagine is in the insect world. So one of the best choices you can make is organic agriculture. So purchase organic food. They have been grown without any synthetic pesticides, inorganic fertilizers, no GMOs. So it's better for the planet, it's better for the workers in the fields, it's better for the communities around the farms, and it's also better for your health. So what else can you do? One very, very important thing, you're going to hear this over and over from me, eat a plant-based diet, or at least eat as many plants as you can. Limit the amount of animal protein you're eating. So part of the reason is because you're eating low on the trophic levels. So it takes a lot less energy to produce plants than it does to produce animals. So if you want to eat beef, there's acres of grass, pasture, and corn grown to feed that cow so you could eat your hamburger. But if you just ate the corn directly, then it wouldn't take so much land to produce the food to feed you. And there's lots of other benefits to a plant-based diet. So less carbon dioxide, methane, and the nitrogen gases, but there's various gases. Yes, less land use, conserves water, less fertilizer, doesn't require antibiotics or growth hormones, which they have to feed to the animals. So consider that and talk to your family about it, because you may very likely not do all of the cooking and the shopping for your house. All right, I will see you in class.